If you are reading this and the person you love is still in the next room, maybe folding laundry, maybe asleep in their chair, maybe humming to themselves in the kitchen, I need you to pause. Not later. Now. Because 6 years ago, my wife Margaret was sitting in the blue armchair by our living room window, sunlight on her hair, complaining about the neighbor's dog like she had done for 30 years. And I thought we had time. I thought there would be another spring, another argument about the thermostat, another quiet Tuesday morning with burnt toast and weak coffee. I was wrong. My name is Thomas Whitaker. I was a high school history teacher in Asheville, North Carolina for 38 years. I taught teenagers about wars that ended generations ago, about presidents long buried, about mistakes nations swore they would never repeat. But when Margaret died, I realized I had not learned the most basic lesson of all. Time does not negotiate. Margaret and I were married 54 years. 54. You would think that would feel like enough. It does not. The first week after she passed, our house filled up like a train station. Neighbors, former students, church members, my brother from Ohio, Margaret's sister from Florida. There were pies and casseroles and flowers with little sympathy cards tucked into them like bookmarks in a sad novel. People kept touching my arm. They kept saying she's in a better place. And I nodded like that sentence was something solid I could hold. For about 2 weeks, there was always someone in the house. Someone washing dishes. Someone taking out trash. Someone asking if I needed anything. Then, slowly, gently they disappeared. Not because they stopped caring, because life pulls people back into its current. And one Tuesday afternoon, I found myself alone in the living room. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it startled me. I had lived in that house 41 years. I had never heard the clock before. That is when the silence began. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a presence. It sits across from you. It follows you down the hallway. It waits outside the bathroom door. I made my first mistake 3 weeks after the funeral. I decided to renovate the kitchen. Margaret had always wanted new cabinets. She had cut out pictures from magazines, kept them in a little folder labeled Someday. I called a contractor and told him to start immediately. Rip it all out. I told myself I was honoring her. What I was really doing was trying to outrun the emptiness. If there were hammers banging and men measuring countertops, maybe I would not notice the missing sound of her voice asking if I wanted more coffee. The house became noise and dust and decisions. Granite or quartz, white or cream. I made choices like a man selecting paint for a stranger's home. Because that is what it felt like. Like I had woken up inside someone else's life. When the kitchen was finished, it looked beautiful. Bright. Modern. Exactly what she had once imagined. And I stood in the doorway and realized she would never see it. The grief did not shrink. It expanded to fill the new cabinets. So if you are standing in your house right now thinking that changing something big will make the pain smaller, I am asking you to slow down. You are not thinking clearly. Grief rearranges your brain. It convinces you that movement equals progress. It does not. Sometimes movement is just panic in disguise. The second mistake I made was with my son, Daniel. He lives in Denver. Software engineer. Logical. Practical. Not sentimental like his mother. He called every evening at 8 p.m. Without fail. At first I answered. Then I started letting it go to voicemail. Not because I did not love him. Because hearing his voice reminded me of when he was 5 years old and Margaret used to sit on the floor building block towers with him. Because he laughs the way she did, short and sudden, like he is surprised by joy. I did not want to hear joy. Joy felt like betrayal. One night he flew in unannounced. I opened the door and he just stood there holding a grocery bag. I figured you forgot how to buy vegetables, he said. I told him I was fine. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at the contents. Mustard. Half a carton of eggs. Expired milk. Dad, he said quietly, you have to eat. I had not realized how little I had been eating. Food tasted like obligation. Margaret and I ate dinner together every night at 6:30 for 54 years. When you do something that long with another person, it stops being a habit. It becomes a rhythm. Without her, 6:30 was just a number. Daniel cooked spaghetti that night. We sat at the new kitchen table. He talked about work, about snow in Colorado, about a hiking trip he wanted me to take with him in the spring. I nodded at appropriate moments. Halfway through the meal, he put his fork down. "You're disappearing," he said. I almost argued. Instead, I looked at my plate. He was right. Grief does not always make you cry loudly. Sometimes it erases you quietly. That night, after he went to bed in his old room, I stood in Margaret's closet. Her dresses were still hanging in color order. Blue to green to red. She liked things organized. I pressed my face into one of her sweaters. It still smelled faintly like her perfume. And for the first time since the funeral, I let myself sit on the floor and cry without trying to stop. I cried until my throat hurt, until the sound startled me, until I understood something I had been resisting. I could not solve this. There was no lesson plan for widowhood, no historical precedent that would restore what had been taken. There was only the fact of it. Margaret was gone, and I was still here. That is an uncomfortable truth, being the one who stays. You feel like you have done something wrong simply by surviving. But survival is not betrayal. It is responsibility. And I did not understand that yet. I was still trying to preserve the house like a museum. Her slippers by the bed. Her book open on page 214. Her reading glasses on the side table, as if she might walk back in and scold me for moving them. I slept on my side of the mattress, rigid and careful, leaving her side untouched. As if grief could be managed by boundaries. It cannot. It seeps. It spreads. It waits. If you are early in this, if the casseroles have just stopped coming and the phone is ringing less, I need you to know something. The silence will feel unbearable. You will want to make drastic decisions. You will want to withdraw from the people who love you because their love highlights your loss. Do not. Not yet. Just breathe through one full year. Let every holiday pass once. Let their birthday come and go. Let the seasons shift. You will not think clearly before then. The worst mistake I almost made did not happen in a dramatic moment. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no big scene. It happened quietly, the way most irreversible things do. About 8 months after Margaret died, I decided to clean out the house. Not tidy, not reorganize, erase. I told myself it was practical. Daniel had mentioned downsizing. The stairs were getting harder on my knees. The yard took longer to mow. I started saying things like, it's too much house for one person. What I meant was, it's too much memory. I began with the attic. 40 years of boxes, school projects, Christmas ornaments, Margaret's old recipe cards written in blue ink that slanted slightly to the right. I opened one box and found the small, crooked clay bowl Daniel made in 2nd grade. Margaret had kept it wrapped in tissue paper. I almost threw it away. That is what grief does that no one warns you about. It makes you reckless with the past. Because the past hurts. And if something hurts, your instinct is to remove it. I filled 3 large garbage bags before noon. Clothes she had not worn in years. Shoes that still held the shape of her feet. I moved quickly, almost aggressively, like I was racing someone. At one point I stood in our bedroom holding her winter coat. The red one she wore every December. The one with the missing button we always meant to fix. I remember thinking, she does not need this anymore. And then another thought followed right behind it. Neither do you. That thought frightened me. Not in a dramatic way. In a steady, dangerous way. Like standing too close to the edge of something high. Grief has a way of whispering that nothing matters. If the person you built your world around is gone, what is the point of the world? That is how people begin disappearing from their own lives. Not all at once. Piece by piece. That afternoon Daniel called. I did not mention what I was doing, but I must have sounded different. He asked what I had been up to. Just clearing things out, I said. There was a pause. Dad, he said slowly, what does clearing things out mean? Just getting rid of things we don't need. Another pause. Are you getting rid of Mom's things? I hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. I'll be there this weekend, he said. He arrived Friday evening. I had stacked the garbage bags by the garage. He walked in, set his suitcase down, and looked at them. Open one, he said. I felt defensive immediately. They're just clothes, Daniel. Open one. I did. The red winter coat was on top. He picked it up and held it like it might break. She wore this to my college graduation, he said. I had forgotten that. He pressed the fabric to his face the way I had done with her sweater months earlier. And suddenly I saw something I had not allowed myself to see. This was not just my grief. He had lost her too. But he had been letting me grieve louder. I had been acting like widowhood outranked sonhood. Pain is not a competition. He sat down on the garage step. Dad, if you want to move someday, we'll figure that out. But don't do this because you think you're supposed to. I can't live in a shrine, I snapped. I'm not asking you to, he said calmly. I'm asking you not to erase her. That word. Erase. I had been trying to make the house lighter. Less heavy. But what I was really doing was trying to make it look like she had never been there. Because the evidence of her existence hurt too much. We carried the bags back inside. Not because everything needed to stay forever, but because decisions made in pain are rarely wise. That night, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table. The new one. The one she never saw. And he asked me something I was not prepared for. Do you still talk to her? I looked at him. Sometimes, I admitted. In the house. Yes. He nodded. I do too, he said. In the car mostly. There was something healing about that confession. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded me I was not the only one carrying her voice in empty rooms. The next morning, Daniel suggested something that at first made me uncomfortable. Let's choose a few things to keep where they are, he said, and a few things to pass on. Intentionally, not in a rush, not in a panic. We started small. Her favorite cookbook stayed in the kitchen drawer. Her reading glasses, I placed them in a memory box instead of on the nightstand. The red coat went back into the closet. But the shoes she had not worn in years? We donated those, not as rejection, as release. There is a difference. It took me months to understand that honoring someone does not mean freezing your life at the moment they left it. You are allowed to change the sheets. You are allowed to repaint the walls. You are allowed to sleep in the middle of the bed. The dead do not need space. The living do. The real turning point came on what would have been our 55th anniversary. I woke up with dread sitting on my chest. I had circled the date weeks earlier. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to collapse under it. Instead, I did something Margaret used to do when something scared her. I made a plan. I drove to the botanical garden where we used to walk every spring. I brought a thermos of coffee. I sat on a bench overlooking the pond. And I spoke to her, out loud, not in a whisper, not apologizing, just speaking. I told her about the kitchen, about Daniel's hiking trip idea, about the tomatoes that had grown uneven that year because I had staked them poorly. I laughed once, then cried once, then sat quietly, and something shifted. Not the grief, the resistance. I realized I had been fighting the reality of her absence like it was an enemy. But absence is not an enemy. It is a condition, and conditions are lived with, not defeated. When I came home that afternoon, the house felt different. Not emptier, just steadier. I moved her armchair slightly closer to the window. Not because she needed the light, because I did. If you are in the middle of this right now, standing in a room full of objects that feel too sacred to touch and too painful to see, listen to me. Do not rush to destroy. Do not rush to preserve. Choose slowly. Choose with someone you trust if you can. And remember that letting go of an object is not the same as letting go of a love. I did not. The thing that finally brought me back was not dramatic. It was not a revelation in church. It was not a grand speech from my son. It was dirt under my fingernails. Margaret always kept a small garden behind the house. Nothing fancy. Tomatoes, basil, 2 stubborn rose bushes that bloomed whenever they pleased and ignored every schedule. I used to tease her about it. We can buy tomatoes at the store, I would say. And she would answer the same way every time. They don't taste like effort. After she died, the garden went wild. Weeds climbed over the wooden borders. The tomato cages rusted. By late summer of the first year, it looked abandoned, which in many ways it was. One morning, about a year and a half after the funeral, I stood at the kitchen sink looking out at that mess of green chaos. and I heard her voice in my head as clearly as if she were behind me. Well, Thomas, are you going to let it die too? Grief can be cruel, but sometimes memory is gentle. I did not make a big decision that day. I did not vow to start living again. I simply walked outside with a pair of gloves. At first, I only pulled a few weeds. The sun felt strange on my neck. I had not spent much time outside since she passed. Inside felt safer, controlled. But gardens do not grow inside. I worked for maybe 20 minutes before my back protested. I went inside, drank water, and sat down. It did not feel transformative. It felt tiring. The next day, I did another 20 minutes. Then another. Within 2 weeks, the space began to look intentional again. Not perfect, but cared for. And something inside me responded to that. Caring for something living reminded me that I was still living too. Grief narrows your world. It convinces you that everything meaningful ended with one heartbeat. But that is not true. It feels true. That is different. The first tomato that grew under my watch was small and slightly lopsided. I held it in my palm longer than necessary. It was not just a tomato. It was proof. Proof that tending still matters. Proof that effort still produces something. I sliced it and ate it standing at the kitchen counter. And I heard myself say, "You were right, Margaret." It did taste different. Daniel visited that fall. He noticed the garden immediately. "You did this," he asked. "We did this," I corrected without thinking. And that was the first time I had referred to Margaret and me in the present tense without collapsing afterward. We did this because love does not evaporate. It changes form. For a long time, I believed moving forward meant leaving her behind. That if I allowed joy back into my life, it would somehow dishonor her absence. But here is what I understand now. Joy is not betrayal. It is continuation. Margaret did not love me for 54 years, so I could sit in a dim house and slowly disappear after she was gone. She loved me so I would know how to love the world without her. That realization did not arrive all at once. It arrived in moments. The first time I laughed at something Daniel said and did not immediately feel guilty. The first night I slept diagonally across the bed without waking up in panic. The first time I walked into the grocery store and bought ingredients for an actual recipe instead of cereal and milk. Small things. That is how healing enters. Quietly, not as a replacement, as an addition. There is something else I need to tell you. About the fear. After your person dies, you become acutely aware of your own mortality. Every ache feels ominous. Every doctor's appointment carries weight. I went through a period where I was certain I would not see another Christmas. Not because a doctor told me so, because part of me believed I should not. As if surviving longer than her was unfair. But life is not measured in fairness. It is measured in days. And days keep arriving whether you feel deserving of them or not. Last spring, at 84 years old, I planted something new in that garden. Not tomatoes, an oak sapling. Daniel thought I had lost my mind. "Dad," he said gently, "you know how long oak trees live, right?" "I do. Longer than I likely will." That is precisely the point. Planting something you may never see fully grown is an act of faith. Not in yourself, in continuity. I pressed that small tree into the earth and felt something steady settle inside me. Margaret will not see it grow tall. I may not either. But Daniel might. Maybe one day his children will sit in its shade. And whether they realize it or not, they will be sitting inside a decision I made on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I chose to keep living. That is what grief eventually teaches you if you let it. You cannot control loss, but you can control what grows afterward. I still talk to her sometimes, when the house feels especially quiet, when the roses bloom unexpectedly, when I burn the toast the way I always did. But I do not talk to her like she is missing anymore. I talk to her like she is woven in. There is a difference. If you are early in this journey, I will not insult you by saying it gets easier. It does not. It gets different. The sharp edges soften. The waves come less frequently. But the love remains exactly the same size. And that is the gift hidden inside the pain. Love outlives the body. It changes address. It moves from across the table to inside your chest. You carry it forward. That is your work now. Not to freeze time. Not to erase the evidence. Not to outrun the silence. but to live in a way that makes the years you had together visible in how you move through the world. I am 84. I drink my coffee at the same window every morning. The blue armchair is still there, though I sit in it now. The kitchen cabinets are still too bright. The clock still ticks, but the silence no longer hums the way it used to. Now it feels like space. And space, I have learned, is not something to fear. It is something you fill carefully. So if your person is still in the next room, go sit with them. Hold their hand. Listen to the ordinary sound of them breathing, because one day that chair may be empty. And when it is, you will not regret the emails you did not answer or the floors you did not sweep. You will regret the minutes you chose to be elsewhere. Be present. The rest can wait. I planted an oak tree knowing I may never rest beneath it. And somehow that feels like peace.